Hello Internet, it's Seth Skorikowski, and today we'll be taking a look at the Conan adventure To Race the Thunder. Written by Kevin Ross, the adventure appears in the Conan Quick Start Guide, which is available for free. The game uses the 2D20 system, which is a bit strange to get used to at first. Last year we ran the other quick start adventure, The Pit of Cthulhu, which was a huge hit with our group. So much so that we've now picked up the full Conan rulebook, and we'll be doing a campaign with this now that our Pulp Cthulhu campaign is over and done with. I will be doing a full system review for Conan eventually. I just want to get a few more sessions under my belt before I can give a really good, thorough opinion of it. Now, before kicking off this campaign, I decided to go ahead and try this adventure out because it's a good introductory scenario and can help ease game masters into the specific parts of the mechanics and kind of walk me through it before we start doing full, larger sessions. The entire quick guide is 50 pages. The adventure itself is only 14 of those and comes with 7 pre-generated characters. Now, for our session, my players used their own characters that they had made for our coming campaign, so we didn't use any of these pre-gens, but they are there for you. The whole scenario took us about 3 hours to complete, which means it's very short, but there is room to expand on it if you like. So what I'm going to do is give my thoughts and my suggestions as a game master who has successfully run this adventure.
Hey, and I'm Jack the NPC. I'm going to be giving this one to you from a player's side of things, as well as my usual comments and quips.
Now, one area that I'm not going to be discussing in this video is the quick start rules themselves. They're pretty much the exact same rules that were presented in the Pit of Cthulhu book, and I gave my opinion on those, and they're unchanged in my Pit of Cthulhu video. So if you want to know my thoughts on the quick start rules, you can go ahead and check that video out for that. This video is only going to cover the To Race the Thunder adventure. However, before we continue, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. So any players in the audience, please stop here. But send your game master this way to see if the scenario might be something you would like to run for your group. Okay, game masters, let's get this started. The scenario is an ode to the Robert E. Howard Conan story Beyond the Black River. It doesn't follow the story exactly, but pretty close at parts. Because it is a public domain story, you can easily find it online and read it for yourself. I do suggest that you check it out because it can help you capture the mood and the descriptions of the area, and it's also a pretty good story. The quick guide comes with a world map, but the adventure takes place here, between the Thunder and Black Rivers on the edge of the Pictish lands. For that, we also get this map, which I suggest printing and handing out to all your players at the start of the session. The PCs are stationed at Fort Tusculum, and it's probably as mercenaries that are just hired to be there. If there's any question as to what their ranks are in the sort of military outfit, I'd go with whoever has the highest command skill.
However, letting your player characters have rank over each other, that could be some pretty dangerous territory. It kind of depends on what sort of players you got. Some of them can be pretty bossy, and that leads to a not fun time by the player that's getting bossed around by the other player. In that case, what I suggest you should do is go ahead and give them some sort of NPC commanding officer that the player characters report to. Now maybe that commander, maybe they're a great guy and everybody loves working under this person. Or maybe they're just a big stupid jerk, kind of like that guy was in Aliens. Anyway, you could have this commanding officer either be with them at the start of the game and they get taken out in the first round of combat, or you can have them where they're stationed back at the fort because they're undermanned and they're sending out different squads to do patrols, and the PCs are just one of those squads going out without a commanding officer, and their job is to report back to the fort whatever they find.
The fort is extremely undermanned and undersupplied, and the scenario opens with the player characters out on patrol somewhere south of Bramble Creek. I had them roll some survival checks and some ranged weapon checks to represent how well their hunting had been going since their supplies are low, and I figured it might be nice to hunt for some food. So my PCs were carrying this clean deer and a pair of beavers along the river when they started hearing pictish drums coming from across the river.
Hearing drums? No big deal. The player characters should be hearing drums all the freaking time coming from the Pict lands. So you need to bring up to them that these drum beats are a little bit different than normal. Maybe they're louder and they're more aggressive, or they can hear the constant whoops and hollers as they're getting themselves pumped up for something. Maybe you can let them give a warfare check, and if they pass the warfare check, they can tell that it's different tribes that are all talking to each other through these drum beats, and they're getting louder and more furious as they're getting themselves psyched up for battle.
Pretty quickly they're attacked. I like that the module offers suggestions for possible and inevitable complications that are going to be happening throughout this adventure. If you go with the idea of an NPC commanding officer that's with them, I would go ahead and just take them out in the first round, leaving the player characters in charge of what they want to do next. The PCs are going to likely want to head back to the fort and notify them that these Pictish war parties have crossed the river. The best way to cross that is the bridge going over Bramble Creek.
Okay guys, hold on. This deer that I'm dragging around is really slowing me down, so I'll tell you what. I'm going to be willing to leave this thing behind, that way we can get to the fort faster and warn them about all these picks, as long as you promise me that we will come back here after this whole thing blows over and you will help me carry it back to the fort.
Before my player characters could make it to the bridge, I went ahead and added the optional scene where they meet the settler girl Rowana, who's being chased by picks. And the reason that I went ahead and put that scene here is I wanted her to be able to tell the player characters about the shaman and the jaguar very early on in the adventure, and also to let them know that the settlers are all in trouble. If the player characters decide to cross at the bridge, we have a good opportunity for an ambush, and I really like that the scenario allows for us to try the ambush mechanics of the player characters doing an ambush rather than just reacting to being attacked by the picks. I also really like the ticking time clock sort of deal where the picks are trying to cut the bridge down and the player characters have to stop them before they do, so I really do like this scene a lot. Now once the player characters arrive at the fort, they will see that it is overrun with picks and completely lost.
Lost? What are you talking about? I am convinced that this adventure is really supposed to be about how we're going to rescue everybody in that fort, save the day, and be big damn heroes. So let's do it.
Game Masters, you need to make it very clear here that trying to fight off hundreds of picks would just not end well for the player characters. The D3 discipline check here, where they might suffer mental torment and actual damage at the side of this, is very important in order to help pass along that impression. But make sure that you describe the scene as being completely hopeless, as hundreds of picks are swarming the walls almost like ants. And this is why at the very beginning of the game, you need to mention how undermanned and understaffed the fort is. That way it can give the impression that there is no way the people inside the fort are going to be able to fight this off. This is one of those spots where reading the original Robert E. Howard short story can be really helpful in order for you to describe the scene and how that attack goes, because Howard did a good job here. Now, the players might be a little lost right now of trying to figure out what it is that they're supposed to be doing if they're not supposed to be protecting the fort. And that's why I introduced Rowana earlier. That way, if the PCs don't think of going and getting all the settlers and warning them about this picked attack, she can go ahead and drop that bug in their ear. But wait until after the PCs have discussed it for a bit. Hopefully they'll come up with that idea themselves before you have an NPC try to feed them that next suggestion of what they might try to do. Settlers Road has about a dozen or so families, each of those averaging about 6 people. The PC's job is to save these settlers and get them across the Thunder River to Velitrium. Now, one thing that the module does not mention, but Howard was very specific about in the story, is that the road between the fort and Velitrium is 19 miles long. So this isn't going to be a quick march, this is going to take them all night, both fighting and avoiding Pictish war parties and trying to get the settlers to safety. The scene at house number 2 as the player characters arrive as the settlers are being attacked is very cool. I love the fact that complications mean that innocent deaths and how that can cause mental anguish and damage to the player characters. One area that I think you could add, though, is a scene from the original short story where some of the families say that some of their men went off down to gather salt and do some fishing, and now the player characters have to race off to go tell them about it in order to warn them to get them out of there. Having the player characters leave the road and the caravan of settlers that they've been doing in order for them to go down in the woods in order to warn these other people is a great opportunity for to use the panther attack scene. The first climax battle happens once all the settlers reach the banks of the Thunder River. Now, one thing that's interesting on the map here is that there's no bridge here. The module doesn't mention any of this, but I think this is an interesting opportunity that you can use. Instead of adding a bridge here or having it be shallow enough that they can ford and all wade across it, my idea is to add a rope-pulled ferry. That way the refugees have to get onto this barge and pull themselves across with a rope, kind of like the barge in the movie Beastmaster. Or have the people on the opposite side have horses that pull the barge across, and then there's horses on the banks with the PCs that has to pull the barge back across for more people to get onto them. This can lead to a really cool obstacle because now instead of just getting the settlers to the river, they have to protect this position as waves and waves of Picts are trying to attack them, and the PCs are trying to protect them as this barge is going back and forth and shuttling people across.
Everyone get on the barge for safety. I'm gonna hold these Pict bastards back.
This leads to a much more dramatic ending where the PCs then have to leap onto that last ferry and maybe, cut the rope. That way nobody can pull them back across, and there's waves of Picts come storming toward them, too many that they could possibly fight. And that kind of gives a cool closing for it versus, okay, we made it to the river, you're safe now, base. Now the module does have a second and expanded optional ending that you can use depending on how your PCs are faring. If they've had a rough go at it, maybe not use this, but if they're, still going along, you can go ahead and use it. And that's where we use the Pict shaman, the leader of these tribes, and he summons this ape-like beast that's going to go ahead and attack the party. Well, the shaman hides off in the woods and is casting spells and supporting this ape-like beast. This can be a really difficult fight because both of these creatures or both of these enemies are going to be nemesis level enemies, which means they're as powerful as player characters. For my game, I had the player characters fight the Pict horde off as they were protecting the ferry. And then they had just enough time to catch their breaths, and then all of a sudden that's when the ape-like monster came out, and the Pict shaman attacked, and they had to fight him as the ferry was going back across. And once that fight was over, that's when they were able to get on the ferry with the last of the settlers and were able to get across for the close of the game. And that was kind of a cool ending because at the very end they could see all the Picts coming, and it was kind of a good closing of, oh, we made it out just in time. Overall, I had a lot of fun with this adventure, and my players and I enjoyed it quite a bit. It did a pretty good job of getting us used to the system mechanics and kind of giving us a good foundation before we delve into larger, more complicated adventures as we start our campaign. And while I really do like the ode to the original Conan story, I found the scenario to be almost a little bit too simple. It's almost pure combat. And I feel with a system like Conan, which has much more than combat, it's kind of selling itself short, and it's kind of selling the game short. Now, game masters can add the command and the persuade test when they're dealing with the refugees, especially if you add the part where there's going to be some that are down by the creek, and now the player characters have to command or persuade the rest of the refugees to go on and not to help them go and get the rest of the people that are down by the creek. It allows a couple skill tests there, and I like the idea where they have to use these skills to help organize and do people rather than just doing combat. Another spot you could do it is with the council and healing tests. We're not where they're helping just each other, but they're also helping all the refugees, trying to comfort them and trying to get them going and trying to get them to the river so they can be safe. And that way you can have it where if they successfully pull off some council or some healing, maybe the caravan can move a little bit faster. Between the two quick start adventures that are available, I think the Pit of Cthulhu is the superior one. Now they're both cheap as free, so there's no harm in going ahead and picking them both up and playing them.
In that case, what I suggest that you do is you go ahead and you start everyone off with To Race the Thunder. And then once you got a little bit experience under your belt and you get a good idea of how to play this game, then you move them on to the Pit of Cthulhu, probably with the same characters.
Now, one last thing I want to mention is the original short story. Some game masters might be a little hesitant to run this adventure for any players who are familiar with Beyond the Black River because they fear that it might give the player some sort of edge. I really wouldn't worry about that. The story is separate enough from the adventure that it's not going to give too much away. There is a little bit like the part of how the Picts aren't actually burning the fort down because they don't want to signal to the settlers that the fort is under attack. So if your players have read the original short story, don't sweat it. They're still separate enough that it's not going to ruin the experience for them. You can find the quick start rules on Drive-Thru RPG, links below. I suggest that you give it a look.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If you want to see some of our other videos and game reviews, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, heroes, you have a great day. We never did go back to get that deer I shot.